Making the transition to clean is going to cost money. And in almost anything that you want to do, there's probably a way the government is going to try to help you do that. Those are the words of my guest today from the White House about the massive opportunities to help businesses, homeowners, communities, and consumers with the new Inflation Reduction Act. What are those opportunities and how do you find them? That's what we're going to find out from our esteemed guest today from atop the White House economic team. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women about corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and ESG-related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. We also give career advice in every episode, especially at the end. But it's kind of sprinkled throughout too, if you pay attention. So you might want to listen for that. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes blog as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a review because it helps other people find us. Opportunities. We all want opportunities. And the new Inflation Reduction Act offers a massive number of potential opportunities to improve your home, your business, even what you drive, your community, while reducing the impact on the environment. Climate change also puts most of our businesses and communities at risk, at some level of risk. And the financial incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act provide support to reduce those risks and help you seize the opportunities. So where are they? Where are those opportunities? Today, we're going to dig into it with a key member of the White House economic team who helped develop it. I'd like you to meet Heather Boushey, who is a member of the White House Council of Economic Advisors and chief economist for the Invest in America cabinet at the White House. Before joining the Biden White House, Heather was co-founder, executive director, and chief economist at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. And before that, she was chief economist at the Center for American Progress. She's been a champion and a scholar of women's economic power, by the way, throughout her career as well. She earned her PhD in economics from the New School in New York City, my hometown, and her bachelor's degree in economics from Hampshire College. I have had the privilege of knowing Heather. I think that she was at the Center for American Progress, and I saw her recently speak at the Aspen Ideas Festival. So here we are today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Heather Boushey to Electric Ladies Podcast. Yay, Heather. Thank you for joining us.
Yay. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you so much for having me, Joan. This is great.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So as I said in my introduction, climate change poses a huge potential financial risk, as we've all seen with the spike in devastating extreme weather. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, and the like. NOAA calculated that it's already cost us $2.5 trillion over the last 40 years or so. And there's more of them and more ferocious ones the past few years and coming up. So since you're an economist, talk about the real financial risk of climate change.
Well, I'm so glad you asked this question. I'm so glad you started here, Joan. I spend a lot of my time thinking about the economic consequences of climate change, as well as the policies that we need to work our way through it, to move to an economy where we have net zero emissions. So these are enormous challenges, and they're challenges in large part because we rely, of course, on fossil fuels and sources of energy that emit emissions. So it's not just you have the damages on the one hand of climate change, but you also have the fact that that many of the ways that we power our economy are the very cause of that. So you have two economic problems going on at the same time. So let me take both of those in turn. So first of all, on the damages, this is This is something that we've known for a long time. Climate scholars have been telling us that, as the Earth's temperature rises, there's going to be an increase in climate change related weather disasters. This will have implications for our economies, our societies. It could change weather patterns that will affect crop yields. It can, affect everything from, much of our infrastructure isn't built to withstand certain kinds of flooding or certain levels of heat. And yet, as the climate changes, so many of the things that we thought we knew, or that we did know in a world with a stable climate, those are now being upended. And so, and all of that affects costs fundamentally. So just, a couple of examples. You think about, I live here in the District of Columbia, so I'll talk about a couple of things that I've seen recently, right? There have been these massive wildfires up in Canada that have led to smoke and air pollutants, being sort of floating down across the United States, all the way down to Washington, D.C. So a long way from Canada. If I were to get in a car, it would take me a long time to drive there. And, in the 20 some odd years or however many decades I've lived on the East Coast, I've never experienced this kind of air pollution on a regular basis. It means you can't go outside, you can't exercise outside, you can't walk, to or from work, or, especially if you have asthma, right? It affects your ability to breathe, and has health implications. And of course, those, some of those are small effects. Okay, maybe I take I drive, well, which of course it adds to emissions, but you drive or you take the bus instead of walking. But there's also all the people that work outside or construction projects that may have to be slowed down or halted because of the lower air quality, which of course is due to the fact that we have higher temperatures, which have helped fuel the flames, as it were, of those fires up in Canada. So all of that together lowers productivity and raises costs for businesses and consumers. So that's just one example. Or you take another example is that because of all this climate change, it's harder to know where the next natural disaster is going to happen. And that means that those companies that insure people's homes, especially in parts of the country or parts of states where there's more likely to be weather-related damage, it's harder for them to assess then how to write that contract for insuring your home or your business or whatever. And so we're seeing insurance companies having a really hard time doing that and actually starting to pull out of some markets. Those are real economic effects for people and communities and businesses. And a lot of it is because, well, in a world of climate change, there's damages. There's also all this uncertainty about where the damages will be and how much that will cost. And so that also adds to the economic costs. So that's one half of the challenge. Okay, so there's a lot of cost there. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's it's big, and of course it's an existential crisis of climate change.
Well, it also costs. One of those costs is having to rebuild all that, right? You have to rebuild the roads that are buckling in the heat. That's just amazing to watch these pictures. They weren't built for 120-degree weather, so they're going, and they're literally. Somebody sent me a picture of some traffic lights melting in Arizona.
Oh my goodness. Right. And so you have to rebuild those, but then you also need new technologies to make those withstand this new climate, right? So we need traffic lights that can be in hotter temperatures. There's probably some traffic lights somewhere in the world that can already do that, but that's also a place where we need new innovation, new ideas, new ways of doing things, right? To help sort of address some of this greater uncertainty. And that's where I think I would put that sort of a little bit in the second bucket too, which is that we need to change the way we power our economy and our societies. And that's the only way through it, right? We need to get to net zero carbon emissions, and we're going to do that by changing how we produce and how we use power all across our society, and it needs to happen all across the world. That's huge, right? Energy is everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in everything.
Literally.
I'm talking to you on a video machine. Well, something is powering that, right? It's electricity, right? There was a computer. I'm looking at a computer screen. Well, this was a manufactured good that used power to make it, and in the process of that, were there carbon emissions, right? It's everywhere. And here's the thing: the president has put in place a series of policies that, along the innovation to commercialization pipeline, every step of the way, there are various kinds of policies in place to make it easier for people, for businesses, for entrepreneurs, for investors to make the transition to investing in clean energy and bringing it to commercial scale as quickly as possible. So a lot of policies on the supply side, getting those ideas, getting the scientists and the engineers to figure it all out, and then making sure that it can be commercialized so that you can go to a store and buy it. And then on the demand side, giving consumers the help and the support so that we can afford these things, right? And we know that the way markets work, that as we make these investments, the costs are going to come down through the process of competition. It's going to lower the prices of these things, and people will be able to afford them. And in many cases, we're seeing that clean energy for solar, of course, now is the cheapest form of electricity. So that's fantastic. But that took decades of investment, starting with public sector investments in the United States and other countries, to get it from a good idea to commercialization at scale, and bring those costs down. It's why it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, because it's about lowering the costs of clean energy so that we can all take advantage of it and make this economic transition so that we can avoid some of these costs of climate damage. So there's a lot of good news here. But I do think, we need to be aware that there's a lot of climate damage that's already built in. And so we are going to need to do a lot of innovating and adaptation, which is going to be costly in the coming years in order to deal with the climate damage, the damages that are already built in because of higher emissions that we have been having.
Right. And also to help the companies and the individuals who are in those industries pivot, right, and change. I interviewed Heidi Binka, who you probably know from the Just Transition Fund, who's doing yeoman's work, training coal miners, et cetera. But a couple things, there were many things you said that struck me, but businesses, there's also opportunity, there's a lot of opportunities in these bills for businesses, right, to, develop the technologies and commercialize them, and also to market them, right? To get them, to buy them, to do contracts with the government, to make it all, to the whole cycle of the economy. So talk about some of the specific opportunities in, and I'm fascinated, I started to say in the three bills, but this is what's also curious to me, is that they all three, I call them the trifecta, that really work together. The Infrastructure Investment Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. They each do a different piece of it, with some of them doing more than others in certain areas, right? So talk about the strategies that are in that. And frankly, how did you decide what to leave in and what not to leave in, what to take out? I understand setting aside the congressional negotiations, but just how do you start thinking about transitioning an entire economy that is like, I remember I did a story on the hazards of MSG years ago, and they had to change the whole food supply. That's just one piece of this. This is literally changing the entire economy. Where do you begin? What starts?
That is a crazy question. And this is the question of our times, right? And these are the questions we are going to be thinking about, grappling with. As an economist, I am fairly certain that this question that you're asking is embedded in the questions that I will be asked for the next 20 years. Probably the rest of my career are going to be about, how do we do this? What do we need to do next? And how does it all sort of play out in the economy overall? So it's a great question. So let me start with a very academic-y kind of answer. So one of the things, so we know a couple of things from the academic work that is in research that's happened over the past 50 years. So first, researchers have shown through all this modeling the potential damages from climate change, right? So we have all these models that showed us, okay, this is how bad it could get. This is what we can expect. So we have a little bit of a sense of that. Now it's an uncertain future. We've never been here before. So it is using best estimates, but we don't have data to rely on because we obviously haven't had that before. At the same time, another group of researchers and modelers and engineering folks sort of went through and thought about, okay, well, so we're using all of this energy today, or producing it, that creates carbon emissions, fossil fuel energy, and we need to move to a new system. Well, how are we going to do that? And there's been all of this work showing that that is possible, right? So what kinds of combinations do you need? You think about how much solar, like given where the sun is around the world and what the wind patterns are, and all sorts of like geological and environmental questions like that. Sort of being like, oh, well, this is how much wind power we could get out of this part of the country or this part of the world, and kind of getting a sense of how we could imagine, via modeling, moving from this system of energy to another system of energy. That's a really exciting set of work. And in this job, I've had a lot of opportunity to sort of meet some of those folks and look at some of that work. Oh, okay, that's really interesting. But that doesn't actually get at your question, which is, how are we going to do it? And the thing about that question is, okay, well, for a long time, we started from the presumption that, well, the way we're going to do it is we're going to put a price on carbon. And so we're going to make it more expensive. And then the market is just going to just work itself out. We don't need to worry about it. The market, people will figure out a way to make money off that, and they'll do it. So we're not going to, it'll be great. And as it turns out, that was a really heavy political lift. It was really hard. The last time we tried to pass a price mechanism on carbon was cap and trade in the early years of Obama, and it didn't pass. And a whole other group of folks started saying, well, actually, we need to look industry by industry, sector by sector. Now, if you were in my office, you'd be able to see that I actually have a pie chart here on my wall that shows the different greenhouse gas emissions by sector. And so, we know that a little less than a third of greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. I'm just going to keep sort of cheating over here. Mm-hmm. About a quarter is from industry, about a quarter is from electricity, and then you've got agriculture and commercial and residential buildings. Okay, all right. So let's look at each of those separately. And the thing is that each of those has its own separate needs. So your question isn't a big question. It is, okay, what are we going to do for transportation? What are we going to do for the power sector? What are we going to do for agriculture? And let me focus on transportation, because I think there's there's great examples across a lot of them that, let me just start there because it was at the top of my pie chart. So
and I'm a transportation junkie. So
well, there you go. Yeah, we like moving, going places. Well, the thing about transportation is that you see that in the CHIPS bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, what did it do? Well, it provided money for school districts across the country to transition to electric vehicle school buses. Awesome. Okay, well, that's a little bit of emissions right there. And also that helps with kids' asthma because they don't have the emissions. If you've ever been around an electric vehicle, they're wonderful. They don't smell. It's so great. They're quiet and they don't smell. And they're not going to affect your lungs because there's no emissions coming out of them. Okay, so that's one thing. But then the other thing in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is recognizing that transportation is a system, right? You have to have the roads, you have to have the bridges, you need the gas stations if you have gas-powered cars. Well, but if you have electric vehicles, you need charging stations. So what the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law did is it invested in setting up a charging network across the country. And so already, and this was a number of months ago, every state in the country has a plan to implement their piece of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to put in place a charging network in their state. And one of the things that has come out of that is working to make sure that the charging is standardized. A really important role for government, as it turns out, is making sure that there's standards. You don't appreciate this enough, that when you buy an electric good, all the plugs are the same. I mean, some of them have that little third plug, but they all plug into your wall, right? Well, the way we've been starting, that wasn't magical. That was government. That was an entity saying, we're all going to use the same plugs. Here's the standard. And we've been working on that with the electric vehicle charging network, so that you can go to any charging station, right? So because there have been sort of questions about which standard are we going to use. So you set up the network. Okay, because one of the biggest reasons people don't want an electric vehicle is that they're afraid that someday they'll need to go on a road trip to visit their grandma or whoever, and they'll need to charge. Even though most of us don't drive that far every day, It is definitely something people think about, but it's not usually something most of us do every day.
Well, but it's a vibe. It's a cultural thing that keeps people from.
Yeah. No, and I totally get that. Okay, well then the Chips and Science Act, as it turns out, cars, especially electric vehicles, use a lot of semiconductors. They use a lot of chips. So part of what we are funding and working on in the chips legislation is the kinds of technology that electric vehicles need. Great. Okay, so we're checking another box. And then, of course, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there are all of these incentives to manufacture electric vehicles. So support on the supply side and support on the demand side, giving consumers tax credits for new vehicles and also tax credits for used electric vehicles, which will become really important in the years to come, and make sure that, it is the case that the people who are likely to buy a new car tend to be at the higher end of the income distribution. But if you can electrify the buses and if you can make used electric vehicles a little bit more affordable, then you can also help deal with some of those distributional consequences and help everyone make that transition. So that's an example of how we are working to reduce emissions, get to net zero in the transportation sector through a series of little policies in all three pieces of legislation. And as I noted, transportation is a little bit under a third of US emissions. So it's a great place. Right, we have to focus there. And if you go through each of the different sectors, you'll see that kind of like, okay, it's a very practical, what do we need to do? What infrastructure do we need to change? Are there new technologies that we need? And what do we need to do to implement it and to make it more affordable? So those are the three pieces of legislation that are all about investing in America and making sure that from the innovation to commercialization pipeline, we are helping those goods get to market at scale at prices consumers can afford.
I love that. That's perfect. And what you did in the process was you also explained some of what's in the bills, right? So for people to get, which is really important. And it reminds me also of I'm sure you know about this, but we can talk about it another time, but the Climber portal that AT&T and FEMA and Argonne National Lab developed, where you can actually simulate you can go in and see how the climate impact is going to be on your patch of land or your business's patch of land. And so if you're going to build said plant, you might not want to do it on a coastal property right now, but wherever, you can go in and see what the impact is going to be. And then probably you can go to, if somebody wanted to go in and look at, there's all these guides now that you guys put out and fact sheets. But if somebody let's take that hypothetical, they're building a plant, say in Kansas or, somewhere in Hurricane Alley, although that seems to have grown with climate change. Where do they go? How do they go about finding, something that's going to help them? Because it's like, I can see somebody saying, well, God, if we're changing the whole economy, there's got to be something in there for me, for my plant in Kansas. How the heck do I find it? How does somebody go about that?
That is a great question. And I'm happy to follow up with some resources on that, because I think it's also, there's like a bunch of sort of websites and different things that I would point you to. I think that the important thing, there's a couple of really important things in what you said. First of all, these are questions that people are asking. They're questions investors are asking. They're questions that business owners are asking. They're questions that families and consumers and everyday people are asking as well. And the reality that the fact that you have to ask that question is a part of the problem, right? It's hard to access. And I'll go back to the very first point I made. There's a lot of uncertainty. So there's a lot of questions for which we don't know, right? We might have a good guess, but what we know is that damages are going to rise. What we know is that we're going to see more storms. What we know is that hurricanes have become more chaotic and they're following different paths. And so it's become harder to predict. So as we're thinking about the data and analytic tools we need, we also need to make sure that we are thinking about the kinds of economic security and that we need to be building into our systems as well, because our go-to rules of thumb about what somebody might need to make those decisions is different today than it would have been a decade ago, or certainly 20 years ago, and probably what they'll need 5 or 10 years from now. At the same time, what somebody needs when a natural disaster happens is also shifting. There's questions about where you rebuild, and what is going to be more sustainable are shifting as well. But I'll follow up with some websites that you can.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And that the where and the how really goes to another question I wanted to ask you, which is one of the problems with that came up with the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, was that some states blocked like the expansion of Medicare or Medicaid in their state, and that deprives people of getting health insurance, right? It's really horrible. But so can that happen with this? Can the Inflation Reduction Act be blocked by governors in states that are politically on the other side and end up keeping it seems stupid. You would think they'd want to rebuild their infrastructure too, but hey, everybody's got their thing, right? So, but is it possible? Can they keep their citizens, their communities, their business owners, their business leaders from accessing these funds or the tax benefits?
Such a great question. So there's two answers to this. So on the one hand, much of our policy to encourage a transition towards net zero, towards clean energy, is done through the tax system. And so that is, it's a federal tax system. It's available to everyone. So not something that states have a lot of say in. The other thing is that we are really encouraging investment, private sector investment. One of the things that we think about this set of policies is that it's government enabled. Government has taken the lead, outlining the path, but it's private sector led. It's the private sector that is making the investments in, clean energy technologies, in new batteries, in new electric vehicles. And the thing is, they are making those investments in every state all across the country. On invest.gov, we have a map that we're updating regularly that shows over $500 billion of announced private sector investments, and in red states and in blue states. And in fact, Governor Kemp in Georgia has said that he wants Georgia to be the energy capital of the nation. That is a state that is taking advantage of the economic opportunity that comes from building a new industry. And that's what we're doing here, building a new industry, the industry of the future, where the U.S. is, going to be competitive. We're going to create good jobs. We're going to create economic opportunity. And we're going to do that by saving the planet and, reducing emissions. But that is economic opportunity. And you're seeing a lot of stories emerging in the press of, rural places or places in red states that are like, we weren't totally sold on this, but now that you've brought this new factory here or this new economic vitality, we can see the benefits, and we can see that actually this is something that works for us in our community. So I've been really excited to see that and to see the power of that across the country.
Yeah, you even have congressmen and senators who voted against it coming to the ribbon cuttings, which is pretty funny. So kind of akin to that, and you touched on this a little bit, but I want to pull it out, and that is, how do we talk about it? I'm a professional communicator and have been since pre-birth, actually, my whole life. My dad had an ad agency when I was a kid. So how do we talk about this so people understand the opportunities that you've been enumerating that are out there for them to grow their business, to build that plant they've been wanting to build and just do it in an energy efficient way, to transform their business in a way that creates jobs and creates opportunity? But how do we talk about it in a way that in this politically charged environment where the language doesn't get co-opted and misinterpreted or misrepresented? We need to find another way.
So I would follow the president's lead here. I think he's done such an incredible job on this. Let me a couple of things. So first, there's 3 pieces of legislation we've been talking about. 2 of them were bipartisan by good margins. It is the case that making investments in communities around the country is what people want. And so that is why why the bipartisan infrastructure law was bipartisan, and people understand the role of technology in America's future. Business leaders understand this. Members of Congress understand this. It's why the CHIPS and Science Act was a bipartisan piece of legislation. And so I think that, number one, understanding that this is about the kinds of industries and jobs we're going to have in this country for years to come. And we know that these are big problems. We know that we need to solve them. We also know that the path to doing that is to make it work for people and communities and business owners and entrepreneurs in communities all across the country. And that is exactly what we've done. So instead of making this harder or by raising costs, we've said, we are going to help you make that transition. We want to make sure that, oh, you want to make an investment? Well, we put in place, investment tax credits and production tax credits. There's the loans program office, which is making loans to businesses that are they've got a really good idea and they've shown it's worked, but they need to get it to commercial scale and they can't find the private capital. Well, that's what the Department of Energy is helping those business leaders do. It's very practical. And it's saying these are industries that if America can take the lead on, that'll be good for Americans, for American businesses, for American consumers, workers, and families. And we can do that by showing the world what is possible. And that's also what's so exciting. The United States has some of the best universities in the world, some of the most talented engineers and scientists, productive workers. We can show the world how we can make and build a clean energy future and inspire other countries to follow along and to work on this with us, because this is a global problem. It's not an American problem. It's a global problem. And so our leadership can also be infectious in a really good way. And I think that's the way the president talks about this as, building an economy from the middle out and bottom up. He talks about investing in America and what that means. And I think that's, again, I think that the legislation, each of those pieces of legislation is very popular. And so I think that that's compelling to people, that these are practical steps we can take that are going to improve our lives.
Yeah, they just need to find out where they are and know that they're there. There's so many people who are just like not in the information loop. By the way, just to demonstrate what you said, after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, Europe, after they got their knickers in a twist, that we were taking, some of their companies were now opening plants in like Tennessee and Kansas and Missouri instead of in rural France. They put their own bill in place that does the same thing for their people. And so it's you're infectious in a good way point. It's like, oh, wait, we can do this too, right?
Well, and Joan, let me just interrupt you. Apologies because that's rude, but let me interrupt you just to note one thing, because some people have concerns about that. But let's be very clear that the folks that know about that, that do the estimates of how quickly we need to reduce emissions, tell us that we need to be investing at a global scale 10 to 15 times the amount of money that we are investing over 10 years in the Inflation Reduction Act every single year. So every single year, we need to do what we're planning to do over 10 years, 10 to 15 times. Now that's globally. But this race to the top, this is exactly what we need to do. We don't have time to sit on the sidelines. And so encouraging everyone to make these investments as quickly as possible to get through this moment. It's a beautiful thing. It's exciting.
Oh, it is. It's a virtuous cycle, right? And it also, what you're also doing is addressing the supply chain issues, which we experienced so vividly during the pandemic, but that are going to be worse in a climate disaster where you can't get goods either. And so now it's bringing those more closer to the plant so that there's less stress on those. And it does all of the above that you were talking about. It reduces uncertainty, it reduces the impact on the environment, it actually creates more jobs in the US as well. Reduces the environmental impact writ large. So yeah, to me, that's another big win-win-win. And it's like we experienced it during the pandemic, right? If not new. So one more quick question, and then I want to get some career advice from everybody. And that is, that you and I have been champions of women forever. So it's still frustrating that women-owned businesses still only get a paltry percentage of government funding, even of corporates. They tout their diversity networks, but they still only give less than 4% to suppliers that are women or quote diverse, however they define that. And there are a lot of women who want to work in this industry, who want to have their businesses in this industry, or who are in a business that can benefit from it. So how is the administration specifically helping women who want to be a part of this new economy in one way or another? They can sit in many seats, right? I don't need to enumerate them to you of all people. But how can you lift women up to help them specifically get these opportunities and connect to them?
Yeah, so let me give you a couple of examples. So first off, throughout, the three pillars of Bidenomics are invest in America, empower and educate workers. And, a part of that educating workers is encouraging businesses to put in place apprenticeship programs, along with, a host of other things, prevailing wages and the like. But, really making sure that these jobs are available to all, and encouraging those employers to make those programs available. And that is all in the implementation, right? That the gender equity, who has access to these jobs, is a super important piece of the puzzle that the administration is thinking deeply about. The other thing a second example is in the CHIPS and Science Act, when the notice of funding opportunity came around for the semiconductor work, there was a request for proposals that incorporated childcare into the business plan. And that's a way of saying, not just for women, but for anybody who has a small child at home who needs access to that care, be that the construction worker or the manufacturing worker or the engineer, that this is recognizing that's a really important piece of the puzzle, and that addressing those care issues is a way to make sure that you are pulling in talent and that you aren't unnecessarily excluding people because you're making it really challenging for somebody to get access to care. That's on top of the administration's priorities overall to foster inclusion. The president has put forward the most robust set of care policies in any budget that any president has ever put forth. In his last budget, of course, many of those care provisions in a slightly different form all, passed the House. And the closest we've come into passing universal access to pre-K and childcare and paid leave that we've ever come. And then the president put in place a very robust executive order around early child and care and education that was a whole of government approach calling on actions from over 50 agencies to deal with issues around, to do what they could do around issues around care. So there's a lot of those pieces. And at the same time, certainly the Gender Policy Council has been working very hard on equity more generally. So there's a lot of different ways that we've gone at this problem. But it starts with making sure that every worker has access to those jobs. And some of that work is, some of that comes down to making sure they have access to those opportunities to get that training.
Well, hopefully Electric Ladies is doing our part to get that news out, because I literally get calls and emails and texts and, social media, notes saying, I've been a foreign service officer, I've been an X, I've been a Y, and I really want to be part of this economy. How do I, what do I do? How do I get there? And what can I do, or where can I tap it? And so I think it's really important. We can't leave women out. We need them to drive the innovation. We need these families to get the benefits. And frankly, we need women's talent, right?
Cheers to that. We know that when you do that, that leads to productivity and growth. I could cite you a whole bunch of statistics on that. So no, the way that you get growth is by letting talent find its best place in the economy. And the way you do that is by breaking down barriers to discrimination of all kinds. And you see the benefits.
Absolutely. So speaking of which, I like to give career advice to mid-career women. So think about women who have, say, 15 years of experience, they have an education, they have a sense of what they do well, they're ambitious, they want to advance, they want to make money, and they want to make a difference. So what advice would you give to them?
That is a tough question because, so many different fields. I will say that I think in so many ways, we are really on the cusp of significant change in our economy. This transition is providing so many new opportunities. And when you pair it with the president's deep commitment to shaping markets to be fair and competitive, I think that creates a lot of opportunity. From early in the administration, the president has made clear that he wants to make sure that markets are open and competitive. And part of his inspiration, his goal for doing that is to make sure that the small business, the entrepreneur, the little guy has the opportunity to succeed. And so, as I do this work here on the White House, every day I come across ideas where it's like, oh my God, that'd be a great business idea. You can see so much opportunity in this transition, and knowing that we are working really hard to make sure that that playing field is fair, hopefully can inspire some of those folks that have that experience and the know-how and who might want to go out on their own and start something new to do it. 2021 and 2022 were the fastest years on record for increases in new business applications. And it's been really exciting to see that. And I really am excited for women to be taking up those opportunities and those challenges. So,
some career advice, though. I mean, you've had such an interesting career. You've been in, you're now at the White House, right? And you got your PhD, you went and worked at the Center for American Progress, you founded your own organization. So how did you go about making those decisions? I mean, obviously, when the president calls, you say yes, but short of that, not everybody who went to the new school ends up in the White House. So what advice would you give to a woman who wants to kind of be you in their own version?
Oh, that's okay. I mean, I would say the following. I have been getting up every day my entire career just focused on one goal, which is what can I do to improve the lives of middle-class families? What are the economics of that? How do we, and what is the role of policy? How can we improve the lives of families like the one that I came from? And that is led me on a path to different research topics over time, but it's always been with the same goal. As you noted at the beginning, I've spent a lot of time looking at gender and care because the movement of women out of the home and into the labor market affected not only women's employment, but it affected family economic security and middle-class economic security in really profound ways, and created a lot of challenges that we have not dealt with that leave families insecure. I think that this climate and energy transition is, the question that I get up every day thinking about is, what does this mean for workers and their families and communities? And what I see is that we're going to be investing in the kinds of jobs that can provide that economic security, but they've got to be good jobs. That's why I'm so proud to work for the most pro-union president in my lifetime. But we need to keep focused on that every day. So I think the long and the short of what I'm saying is that for me, the key to my career was being clear on what my mission is. And I feel I feel so enormously fortunate that I found a president to be able to work for who shares that goal. And to be able to get up each and every day and say, hi, sir, I'm here to help you with the economics of how you are going to reach your goal of building an economy from the middle out. So I think the lesson in that is either be the leader that you want to believe in, or find that leader and attach yourself to him and see what amazing thing you can do together. But for me, it's been about being clear on what it is that I wanted to achieve.
I love that. And being clear on what you do well also, and looking for it, right? Like don't give up, because you kept looking, right? Whatever iteration, it made sense. So thank you so much, Heather. I really appreciate it. Any final thoughts before I let you get back to your job?
Thank you so much for this work. Thank you so much for the questions. This is a great podcast, and I'm really excited that you are taking on these really important issues. And I love that you are bringing, all of these questions about our society and gender into this clean energy conversation. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So thank you so much for joining us today on Electric Ladies Podcast. Heather Boushey of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. So which part of the Inflation Reduction Act will you pursue? Which kind of job will you look for? Post it to us on Twitter and Threads at Joan Michelson. Send us any questions there as well. And you may win a 30-minute consulting session with me. You never know. Please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our talented, amazing guests like Heather, our articles, consulting, and career advice. You can subscribe on electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.